Hello and welcome to Food Tank's webinar series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Small. I'm Food Tank's Global Events Director. I'm really excited about today's webinar with Gianna Bonis-Profumo. She's the Young Earth Solutions, or YES, Ambassador at the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition, or BCFN. Today her presentation will focus on how food-based approaches and nutrition-sensitive agriculture programs can address malnutrition in developing countries. This webinar will be recorded and posted on foodtank.com afterwards. You can also follow along and participate on Twitter using hashtag #FoodTank. Also, please submit your questions using the questions tab in your control panel or email them to Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, at foodtank.com. So without further ado, Gianna, it's wonderful to have you here today, and I'm excited to hear your presentation. I'll give you the floor now.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be today with the Food Tank and to be hosting this webinar. I'd like to give a special thank you to Danielle Nierenberg for inviting me to be here today, and of course to Sarah Small for organizing it. It's an honor really to be part of this webinar series that are informing and inspiring people about how to fix our broken food system. So today I'll present some information on how nutrition-sensitive agricultural programs and food-based approaches can address malnutrition in developing countries. And I'll specifically showcase the Food and Nutrition Hub project, which combines both approaches into a practical initiative that is about to commence in East Timor. And so, as defining a problem well is key to identify adequate solutions, the webinar will start with a review on malnutrition, providing some definitions, stats, and its causes. But first of all, let me introduce myself briefly. So my name is Gianna Bonis-Profumo, and I'm the founder and project manager of the Food and Nutrition Hub, a project that aims to empower women to prevent malnutrition in a sustainable manner. The project idea, as Sarah said, won the Young Earth Solutions contest in 2014, organized by the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition. But basically, I'm a development practitioner and who is really passionate about food and nutrition security issues. And it's an area that I've had the opportunity to work with Indigenous women and children, and from which I've learned about the complexities of ensuring good nutrition in disadvantaged communities. And so in a few days, I'm moving to Timor-Leste to commence the project implementation. So you can imagine how excited I am to bring to reality this project. But first, let's have a look at malnutrition, which is understood as lack of proper nutrition caused by not having enough to eat, not eating enough of the right things, or even being unable to use the food that one does eat due to being sick. So there's two types generally. There's undernourishment, which exists when caloric intake is below the minimum dietary intake, which means energy levels. And so that's around 2,300 calories. And nowadays we have 795 million people who are not able to access and to consume this amount of calories. So this means 1 in 9 people are not able to get enough food to be healthy and to lead an active lifestyle. So undernutrition can trap children, families, communities, and even nations in an intergenerational cycle of poor nutrition, illness, and poverty. And so that's generally what's equated with hunger. That's the way it's quantified, the number of people who is not able to consume enough energy for their caloric needs. So on the other hand, we also have malnourishment, which is eating and consuming calorie-rich diets, but of poor quality. And so this leads to two different scenarios. One is macronutrient deficiencies, which are essential for growth, such as iron, vitamin A, iodine, and zinc. And they result in what's called hidden hunger, in the sense that it's not visible. And it affects 2 billion people. Later on, I'll expand on this. And then also we have excessive caloric consumption, which is translated in obesity, which is also due to poor quality diets. And that affects 500 million adults nowadays in the world. And so we'll have a quick look at the proportion and number of undernourished or hungry people which has decreased from 1 billion in the 1990s to 795 million now, just in 2015, which affects around 15% of the population in developing countries, which I think is still extremely high, particularly when we have, apologies, so many resources in abundance. And so this is a distribution of the hunger nowadays. And as we can see, it's mainly focused in Asia and Africa. However, Asia is the continent where the most hungry people are in terms of absolute numbers. And on the other hand, in sub-Saharan Africa is the region with the highest prevalence, so the percentage of population who is hungry. So 1 in 4 people are undernourished in Africa. And so this is a map of the hidden hunger from 2013, and again it translates in both the same areas. But let's have a look. Who are the malnourished? So the malnourished tend to live in poor and rural communities in developing countries. Most of them, 50%, are smallholder farmers who produce food but also buy some, lenders, workers, fisherfolk, pastoralists, forest-dwelling peoples, and also the urban poor. However, women make the majority of the world's small-scale subsistence farmers, and they also produce most of the food in many developing countries. So it's important to highlight that there is a gender bias in terms of who are the malnourished, as women and girls account for over 60% of the world's undernourished. And so targeting women farmers in rural areas of developing countries, by doing that, we can have the most impact in reducing world malnutrition. As you will see, this is a passion of mine. Another very important one is children malnutrition, because children are the future of a country. And if many of them are malnourished, it can compromise its ability to develop. So particularly if there's a high incidence of stunting or low height for age, that means when babies are too short for their age, this reflects on chronic malnutrition and also frequent infections. So how can this compromise a nation's future? Well, stunting affects the physical and cognitive development capacity in children, as well as making them more prone to disease. And that impacts into the school performance and also in their productivity when they're adults. So poor nutrition in the first 1,000 days of children's life can have irreversible consequences. And that's what happened with stentings. And it can trap those children in a vicious cycle of poverty and undernutrition. And so that's why it's key to develop interventions that can be delivered during those 1,000 days, the critical 1,000 days window of opportunity, which is from the time of conception until the age of 2, which can lead to the reduction of prevalence of stunting. And so, luckily, and the good news is that, of course, stunting has decreased from 40% in the 1990s to 26% in 2011 in developing countries. However, there's countries such as Timor-Leste, where still 1 in 2 kids are chronically malnourished. And of course, even though they've improved, they're still one of the highest prevalence in the world. So this is something we need to look at. Let's have a look briefly at the determinants of nutrition and their underlying causes. So nutritional status is influenced by 3 broad factors: food, health, and care. In a more refined conceptualization, the immediate causes of nutrition are nutritious intake and health. And that gets complemented with the underlying causes, which are access to food, maternal and childcare practices, and water and sanitation availability. And so the optimal status of nutrition results when children have access to affordable, diverse, nutrient-rich food. Nutrient-rich, this is very important. Also appropriate maternal and child care practices, adequate health services, and a healthy environment, including safe water, sanitation, and good hygiene practices. So there's two kinds of nutrition interventions that aim to address the causes of malnutrition. There's nutrition-specific interventions that address the immediate causes of nutrition, and they're particularly directed at those 1,000 days that I was explaining before. And there's also nutrition-sensitive interventions which aim to address the underlying determinants of nutrition through other sectors, and those can be agriculture, food security, education, social protection, sanitation, which incorporate specific nutrition goals. So in this case, we're going to look at nutrition-sensitive agriculture. And so why? Well, why nutrition-sensitive agriculture? So agriculture and rural development provide a crucial opportunity for reducing malnutrition, not only because large proportions of malnourished populations live in rural areas, but also because agriculture is their main source of livelihood. So improving nutrition outcomes of smallholder farmers will improve their productivity due to better health, while potentially reducing child malnutrition in a sustainable way. So the objective is to develop targeted agriculture and livestock programs focused on, first, improving access to high quality and diverse diets, and second, enhancing poor households' income that can complement efforts to increase agricultural productivity. And so examples of those could include staples fortifications, homestead food production, and animal source food interventions. And so the pathways by which agricultural programs can improve nutritional outcomes have been widely discussed, and they're shown in the slide. But what is clearly agreed among scholars is that women are the key mediators in the pathways between agricultural inputs, how food is distributed within the household, and child nutrition. And so it also recognizes that women's control over resources and income flows have a disproportionate positive impact on household health and nutrition. This is so exciting, I find, because this framework gives emphasis to measuring the nutritional impact of agricultural projects, which might seem obvious, but it doesn't really happen on a widespread basis. Normally, agriculture and nutrition, they operate generally in separate areas, funding-wise and implementation-wise. And so, due to this reason, agricultural programs have had little impact on child malnutrition, and incorporating a nutrition lens to them is crucial if stunting levels are to be reduced. So nutrition-sensitive agricultural development can support households' livelihoods by enhancing their capabilities and productive asset base, while at the same time ensuring the necessary nutrition requirements for rural populations to fully participate in educational and labor activities, and they're vital for economic growth. Moreover, poor dietary quality can be addressed too by developing agricultural programs that diversify food crops, thus making them nutrition sensitive. So let's have a look at how. So a non-diverse diet is almost synonym of micronutrient deficiencies. For example, eating mostly rice. So micronutrient deficiencies can lead to poor growth, and also inadequate intake of specific micronutrients such as iron, folic acid, and iodine have demonstrated harmful impact on the development of the brain and nervous system and on subsequent school performance. So there are two main approaches to address micronutrient deficiencies or hidden hunger. There's a clinical approach, which focuses on single nutrient supplementations through public health campaigns, and food-based approaches that aim to address deficiencies through food, either via biofortification, food supplementation, or household food production. So based on the rationale that most micronutrient deficiencies can actually be solved with relatively small increases in the variety of food consumed, because greater dietary diversity is associated with improved growth and nutrient status. So food-based approaches understand nutrition as part of a system and not only as a reductionist approach where nutrients are considered in isolation. But they're not mutually exclusive, these approaches. In many instances, both are needed at unison. We need to work together. So which are the benefits of particularly looking at household food production? It is one of the food-based approaches. I'm really passionate about that one because it really focuses on strengthening local food security, which means it's a more resilient approach. It does not depend on large external fundings to fund those public health campaigns. It makes people less vulnerable to external shocks such as price volatility and ensures a stable food security through yearly round crops. It also supports biodiversity and agrodiverse food systems, which helps to halt the environmental degradation, which is key to ensure the resources for future generations. It is also a cost-effective approach in the sense that particularly when it's combined with nutrition education and in context with minimal health systems presence. It also supports income generation opportunities, as if through these agricultural interventions, there's more food produced, surplus can be sold to the market. And it also has indirect long-term outcomes, such as women's empowerment, strengthening local capacity, and community ownership and environmental sustainability. And so I'm making a strong case for the food-based approaches to address malnutrition deficiencies because despite its documented successes, they have failed to gain scientific acceptance and adequate funding. And this is partly because they've been inadequately evaluated and because their outcomes go beyond biological levels of macronutrients. And they can only be measured in the long term, such as women's empowerment or environmental sustainability. And so, on the other hand, we need to be mindful that this approach, a food-based approach, requires a minimal level of health and water sanitation to be effective, and it can address acute causes. But it can still address hidden hunger effectively with multiple social and environmental outcomes. And so I'll introduce you now to the Food and Nutrition Hub project, which evolved from this big problem of malnutrition to a specific solution. And so the scope initially was Southeast Asia, and now I'm focusing particularly in Timor-Leste. And so this project emerged from a university paper, and now it's being transformed into a real-world project. So let's have a look at the Prezi from the Food and Nutrition Hub, because it was simply too cute not to include it in today's webinar. So please bear with me. I'm just gonna do the swap of screen and yep, okay. Let's go. Okay. So welcome to Prezi. So
Gianna,
the Food and Nutrition Hub.
your screen isn't showing yet. Could you try one more
It's
time?
not?
Not yet, no.
Oh, apologies. Okay.
And I hope it does, because like she said, it's very cute.
Okay. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, that's great.
Okay. Apologies for that, everyone. Okay. Okay. So welcome to the Food and Nutrition Hub Prezi presentation. So the Food Nutrition Hub goal is to empower women to prevent malnutrition in a sustainable manner. It aims to improve the dietary intake of women and children by enhancing the sustainable production of nutritious foods at the household level and by teaching adequate feeding practices. The Hub is a community resource center where agricultural inputs are provided and generated, and it is a place where sustainable agriculture techniques are taught and demonstrated in combination with nutrition education activities. And so what's this project trying to address? Well, first, we're going to go to Timor-Leste. Let me please introduce you to this very young and very small nation, which is in the north of Australia, in the south bit of Southeast Asia. And it emerged as an independent country in 2002, after 4 centuries of Portuguese colonial rule and 24 years of Indonesian occupation. So this hidden institutional fragility, which is key to understand its current situation as one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia, where 41% of its population is living below the poverty line, and it only has a 1.2 million people. So rural populations in Timor-Leste experience the highest levels of poverty, food insecurity, and malnutrition. They are over 70% of the population and are characterized by difficulties for accessing services and markets due to poor infrastructure and remoteness. And so the malnutrition cycle is common amongst rural populations, and it means that malnourished mothers give birth to low-weight babies, which are more likely to grow into undernourished adults that will reproduce the cycle once again. So this project focuses particularly on addressing stunting, due to the irreversible consequences that it has in children, as we have seen. So the majority of the rural population base their livelihoods in subsistence agriculture, mainly focusing on rice and maize production. Some have vegetable gardens with small livestock systems, including poultry, which women tend to care for. However, those are low input and low output systems where animals are raised under poor conditions and productivity is low. Yet I'll argue how women are the key to break the malnutrition cycle and ensure their children's future. Let's see how. This is our solution. The Food Nutrition Hub works to support rural women in 2 ways, the 2 pillars of the project. First, through teaching and demonstrating integrated vegetable and poultry production. And second, through nutrition education activities. So it's a simple yet effective solution to a very complex problem. And so this project proposes a food-based approach to address malnutrition through household food production, and it is based on 2 conceptual frameworks: nutrition-sensitive agriculture, by focusing on the pathways in which women can bridge agriculture and nutrition outcomes, and a sustainable livelihoods framework, by strengthening all assets in which livelihood strategies relies on. So let's have a look at the first pillar. The first pillar focuses on integrating poultry systems in vegetable gardens. Chicken enclosures are used to rotate across different garden beds to fertilize and manage pests. Once a crop is harvested, chickens are moved from one garden bed to the next to work on it. And so there's various models of chicken enclosures, some that are mobile, such as the ones above, and the ones that are permanent, such as the ones below, which are fenced. And so this is a sustainable agriculture technique because it improves soil fertility through chicken manure, which replenishes the nitrogen cycle, which is a mineral that's crucial for plant growth, and it enhances soil biology. It also turns food waste into valuable acid, poultry feed, and chickens clear weeds and control pests, thus saving time and labor in garden preparation. And also through continuous practice with this method, it improves the natural resource base and it results in productivity gains. Also, the hub supplementary feed is grown to boost the productivity through insect farms. So by breeding worms and black soldier flies larvae, which are rich in protein and fats and fed with household food waste, we ensure the nutritional content of eggs. And so this approach enables to produce more and diverse, nutrient-dense food sustainably. And so this is the key, to focus not only on what is produced, but also on ensuring that it has a high nutritional content. And so the second pillar focuses on nutrition education, because we have seen how women are the key mediators of health within the family unit. So it uses social behavior change communication, which is delivered in a culturally meaningful way, by considering women's social context and by using appropriate training methodologies. This approach improves feeding practices of women and children for a balanced diet, and it will particularly focus on complementary feeding practices, which is when children start eating solids after weaning from breastfeeding. So this approach generates multiple nutrition outcomes because it decreases the dietary intake of protein and micronutrients, which are essential and fundamental for child growth. And this is done through vegetables, eggs, and meat consumption. And so this enhances diet diversification. But let's focus on eggs because eggs are exceptional. They are a source of high quality protein, vitamin A and B12, iron and zinc. They come in a hygienic and safe package on a regular basis. They are good for feeding children and they are culturally acceptable. And by the way, this Friday happens to be International Egg Day. So I encourage you to tweet about the amazing potential of eggs supporting nutrition with the hashtag World Egg Day 2015. So when both pillars are combined, a third outcome emerges, which is women's empowerment. So these two pillars then increase women's decision-making power in two ways: by creating small income opportunities through the sale of surplus produce and thus enhancing their status, and also by building their skills through knowledge and education. So women are able to provide for their family well-being, generating a sense of dignity. And so women are the agents of change by creating a more resilient and diverse household food production system. And so that is why improving chicken husbandry practices is crucial, because it enables women to participate in a holistic approach to address malnutrition by combining the right knowledge with the means to achieve it. So what's the implementation plan? So now I'm about to start implementing the project. And now I mean literally in less than 2 weeks. So I'm already talking with international NGOs, different local NGOs and some government departments to refine the project to the local context and to tailor it to the specific needs of the communities that we will work with. So the idea is to run a pilot project in different districts in order to measure its impact and generate evidence of its effectiveness. And this is, again, to further support food-based approaches and provide, some more, hopefully, documentation for this approach. And so with that regard, I'm also considering to partner with a research institution or even a research project. So I'm still considering this. Simultaneously, I'm still seeking for funding opportunities. I have money to start up, but we need more funds to be able to implement it fully. So the project is a model really that could be replicated in different countries. It requires a small startup budget and making it a low-cost intervention, and it can also be operated as a social enterprise in the midterm. And so the Food and Nutrition Hub project has different outcomes, and they're multiple. It improves child and maternal nutrition through food-based approach. It promotes sustainable farming practices, which are paramount in this era of climate instability. It also enhances the decision-making power of women and their empowerment. It provides the food and nutrition security of the rural poor in Timor-Leste. And it is a high-impact and cost-effective solution that works on creating resilience at the local level. So the Food and Nutrition Hub project will transform the lives of mothers and children in rural Timor-Leste by empowering women to prevent malnutrition sustainably, because the well-being of rural populations depends upon the achievement of ecologically sustainable livelihoods for local food security. And so a final trick, the famous sentence, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man a fish, feed him for a lifetime. Well, Joel Negin got a better one. Give a woman a fish, feed her for a day. Teach a woman to fish and support her with low levels of financing needing to buy a fishing rod, some worms, and an iceberg, and feed her household for a lifetime. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gianna. That was a great and informative presentation. We do have a lot of questions from our listeners, but a reminder to continue to send any questions you have using your chat box or email them to me at sarah@foodtank.com. So for the next 15 minutes or so, we'll go through as many as possible. Gianna, I'd like to start by asking you a question from a listener named Mike. He says, "Hi, Gianna, great presentation. Have you found in your work a negative effect from past Western agricultural aid that is heavy in corn, soy, sugar, and light in micronutrients and diversity?"
That's a great question. Not in my experience, in my personal experience, in my direct experience. For example, in Timor-Leste, there is no. It's a net food importer, so they basically import right to provide for their needs. There's no soy. There's no soy being grown there. So it's probably a bit different than in other countries, but definitely I'm really aware that with the monocultures of these particular crops, a lot of local populations get displaced, and traditional common lands get used for the benefit of these bigger projects. So, not in my experience, which I'm really thankful, and I'm really looking forward to go to Timor and see how we can support them for this not to happen to them. So thanks for your question.
Great, thank you. And the next question reads, what originally inspired you to create the Food and Nutrition Hub project?
What actually inspired me was really the realization that the irony that the hungry people in the world are subsistence farmers who grow food for a living. That really tweaked with my head, and that really surprised me. And when I was doing more research through my master's at the university, and by doing this briefing paper on nutrition sensitive agricultural development, then realizing the role of women amongst these in being food producers themselves, and also by being more vulnerable to food insecurity and malnutrition, combined with my personal experience and enjoyment in working with women, it really was like the penny drop. I'm like, okay, and I'm passionate about the impact, and so I was like, okay, if one of the best ways that it looks to have the best impact to address malnutrition and hunger issues is to work with this collective, with subsistence farmers in rural areas, and particularly with women who also manage nutrition at the household level. So for me, that was a combination of many of my passions and backgrounds into a very clear conceptual framework that I think it's going to guide me for a long time.
Great, thank you. And the next question reads, how are entrepreneurs and/or innovators helping address nutrition-sensitive agriculture, and is there room for growth in this area as well?
Yes, of course, there's room for growth in this area. I mean, I guess I consider myself, a social entrepreneur, and I mean, how there's so many rural areas in this world with people who need, a bit of support in being able to provide for their own needs a little bit better. And so the whole idea about diversifying crops, it's about many times supporting, going back to more traditional practices, or integrating, animals with vegetable production. And that needs to be, of course, contextual to the local context and the traditional crops, and having a look perhaps of what are the most nutritious species. But I think there's a lot of scope for group like producers associations or cooperative to grow to provide for their own needs, but then to be able to sell surplus in an aggregated manner. So I think that, and that also combining with value adding into the produce, and perhaps selling to urban centers, because at the end of the day, this could be a really win-win situation where there's an increase in the demand for nutrient dense food in urban areas, and rural producers may have the opportunity to be able to tap into that if there's enough infrastructure and market channels. So that's an area that I think nutrition sensitive agricultural development could tap in, because it would provide nutritious food at the household level for vulnerable populations, while at the same time maybe perhaps being able to provide for more urban context.
Thanks, Gianna. And we have some questions regarding animal agriculture and diversifying. So the first one reads, I have a problem with the focus on animal agriculture, particularly the egg industry, which has been exposed for its unsustainable water consumption and, of course, treatment of animals. So he's wondering what you have to say about that. And then the other question is, can you describe the importance of diversity within farming systems when implementing approaches like yours?
Okay, so I mean, I agree that there's a lot of animal rearing that pose a lot of questions in terms of ethics and environmental impact. But I think we need to distinguish between village or community-based approaches and more industrial scale ones or commercial scale ones. So the one that we're proposing through the Food and Nutrition Hub, it's all at the household or community or village level, which is non-commercial, which is about supporting a very low impact animal husbandry practices. So that's quite different to what we would have in the developed countries, or when they provide it on a commercial scale. So I think that the criteria and requirements from projects would be very different. And I personally don't eat meat for ethical reasons, and so I personally don't find any ethical issues with supporting animals at a household level, such in this context, with such a low impact. I think it's actually something that should be encouraged and funded more broadly, because the nutritional gains and human gains that we can have from it are very, very, very clear. And sorry, what was the second question? How to diversify? Could you please repeat, Sarah?
The second part of the question, or second listener's question, was, can you describe the importance of diversity within farming systems when implementing food-based approaches to malnutrition?
Yeah, so diversity of cropping systems is super important in the sense of enhancing biodiversity and ensuring the health, the health of the soil, and also the human health. So it's all about this symbiotic relationship between human health, the environment, and biodiversity. So I guess the idea is to try to incorporate as many elements as possible into the system, and to be able to, on the one hand, provide for diet diversity, so trying to incorporate different crops that have different sources of macronutrients in them, to be able to revert into the health of the family, while at the same time trying to care for the environment. So generally, I have a bit of a permaculture background, and the use of animals for nutrient cycling and nutrient management, it's really, really important. And that's something that's been practiced for millennia, when that's adequate for the environmental climate and environment where you are. So I think it's about trying to look those synergies in terms of how you're able to better provide for human needs and for the animals' needs, but also for the environmental needs, and trying to assess what are the traditionally grown crops, indigenous crops of that area, which generally tend to be better acclimatized to pest disease and even climatic variation, and many times are also more nutritious than other hybrid sort of developed breeds. So I would do a lot of research of what's being grown and trying to diversify the system for resilience too, because then more diverse system is a lot more resistant to pests, and it ensures a higher degree level of food security because it's quite unlikely then that all of the crops will fail at once, compared to monoculture. It's a lot more risky in that regard. Thanks.
Thank you, Gianna. And I think you actually started to answer a little bit of this next question, talking about culturally appropriate and regional crops. But Mariana wants to know, or she writes, "Thank you, Gianna. It was an inspiring presentation." And her question is, besides the egg focus, do you consider a specific set of vegetables more recommended to grow?
Well, there's some like dark leafy greens that are particularly high in iron, and there's for example, like the orange flesh sweet potato that it's really high on vitamin A. So they are they're two very good crops for. And that again, the crops depend to the climate, your bioregion and your climatic area. But if those are available, they're very good for these two particular sources. Then there's also the moringa, which is a tropical tree, which is also packed with micronutrients and minerals, which is also very recommended to use in complementary feeding, like sprinkles or like topping of porridges, in order to ensure child malnutrition. There's a great project in Indonesia doing this, the IDEP Foundation. So I guess that's quite regionally specific, but I guess from the plant world, I would choose those ones, and definitely from the animal world, I'm a fan of chickens because they're easy to manage and you can get a regular supply of protein without having to process the animal.
Thank you. And the next question, actually two that I'll pair together. But the first part is, I'm curious why Southeast Asia is your pilot area for their implementing the program. If there's anything that makes it unique, and if it's successful, will the hub model be scalable? And then Anna wants to know, do you currently have an idea of what data you'll be monitoring or measuring to evaluate the impact of this pilot program in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much. My reason for choosing Southeast Asia, I guess came out of combination of personal preference, because I just feel really interested and attracted by the culture, and I've traveled extensively in this area, and that's where I like to focus my work. But also it was circumstantial in that at the university, when I was doing this briefing paper, it was to support a large research application, which was focusing on 4 countries of Southeast Asia. And so I undertook a country profile of Indonesia, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, and Timor-Leste. And so I extensively look at these particularly 4 countries, at their frameworks and agricultural systems and food and nutrition security status. So that was sort of a perfect match. And also I live in Australia, and that's one of the key areas where there's a lot more, research and funding for projects. So that was, I guess, my main reason. And out of them, there was no choice. So I ended up, choosing Timor-Leste as a place to start implementing it, is because I was in this country 5 years ago. I used to live in Darwin, which is a very similar climatic region, so I feel familiar with the tropics, and also it's a very high need area, which is a lot, the stunting prevalence there is a lot higher than in the other cases, and also being such a close neighbor to Australia, which has been my home country for the last almost decade. I feel it's a good place where to start. So in terms of measuring the impact of the project, yes, there are some resources out there and different approaches in terms of how to go about it. I mean, ideally, they talk about, like in academia, it's all about randomized trials and trying to control variables. But from a social science perspective, this is sometimes very difficult to implement. And at the end of the day, I think it's important to try to find models where we can also measure the synergistic outcomes and more indirect outcomes that emerge from these sort of projects, such as, women's empowerment. Like, how do we measure women's empowerment, and how can we do that in a short time frame? So there are different models proposed, and USDA is doing a great work on that. But I'm really interested in trying to delve a little bit more into these more indirect outcomes, and how to measure the impact of these projects in a more creative way, and also by involving the participation of the populations, and really trying to report on the perception of the participants of the project, and not just our measurements. So a combination of both. And also back to the scalability of the intervention. Of course, I mean, from my perspective, I think it's definitely a scalable proposal, and that's my whole strategy is to run the pilot project in different districts that try to run a good evaluation with it, which will combine both quantitative and qualitative data. As I said, I think that taking the perceptions and grasping the richness of the story of change and of growth in these projects is really important, and that needs to be reported in a bit of a different way than with numbers. But I love both. And then, once we have this evaluation report, which hopefully shows a positive impact and interesting outcomes, then the idea would be to try to scale it up and implement it at a broader scale in Timor-Leste. And if other organizations or anyone else is interested in this approach, by no means, let's join forces and trial it in different places and expand it, because at the end of the day, the whole objective of this really is to try to support those rural populations who are more vulnerable to all these fluctuations in climate and health in their own households. So please contact me if you'd like to consider that.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Gianna. And then the next or last two questions we have are kind of looking forward towards the future as well. So the first is, where do you anticipate funding to come from for the project for it to be financially sustainable? And the second part is, where is your work headed, and how will it impact communities in the future, especially in regard to climate change?
Excellent questions. Yeah, funding one is always the tough one. I was super lucky that through winning the BCF and Yes contest, they gave me 10,000 euros, which is around 15,000 Australian dollars. I can remember how many US dollars. But that's been my startup money, which is fantastic, but obviously not enough to run a project. And so my strategy will be to run a crowdfunding campaign, but that's once I've started working on the ground, identifying partners. And I'm also happy to, not happy, but I think I'll be able to self-support myself by doing other parallel sort of work, or maybe trying, I have different strategies in mind that I need to see depending how the donors respond on the ground. But my choice was to not wait till I had all the money for the project, in the sense that I would have had to wait probably, at least a year to have enough funds. I'm being a bit bold, I guess, in that regard, and I'm moving over there, and have these funds to which will enable me to be there at least for 6 months, because it's a relatively cheap country, and also have my savings, and I have different ways and people that I like to talk to about this, and different strategies that I cannot get in detail now. But that's going to be really interesting. But I'm really hoping that it's going to be, I guess, a diverse diversified approach, a little bit from the fund, a little bit from the price, a little bit from the crowdfunding, a little bit from hopefully some donors that are going to be interested. And yeah, and Australia is really close, and it pays good wages, so I may be able to also pick up some consultancy work on evaluations over there or in Northern Australia. And so the future, could you please repeat the question, Sarah? Apologies, everyone. It's a bit late in Australia at the moment.
Of course, no problem. So the second part was, where is your work headed and how will it impact communities in the future, especially in regard to climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, personally, I've always dreamt of working in professional non-faith-based organizations, and that's what I sort of wanted to do. But after studying last year at university, I actually really enjoyed going back to academia, and I was considering maybe to intertwine project work with the third sector, with perhaps a bit of research and teaching at the university. So this is something I'm thinking about now, because perhaps that also could be a really good way to contribute to these great approaches, or approaches that I think they could be really effective, with some more hard evidence that could help perhaps donors to go more the ways, these ways, and not more clinical ways, I guess. So yeah, that's something that I'd like to consider. And in terms of climate change, I mean, wow, that's big. And when I don't know, for some reason, when I think about climate change, I always think of Bangladesh. There's so many million people there, and most of them live in the Delta. And the minute we get a little bit of a sea rise level, we're going to have a lot of people in a very desperate situation. And so I think for me, it's a really present issue, and I think it's going to affect very differently in different places. So I think the work and the support the communities will need will differ a lot. There's a lot of Pacific nations too that are struggling in the sense of access to water and even land, in terms of, again, when the sea rises. And so yeah, climate change refugees are already on the go. So yeah, I think this will definitely affect, and more, particularly in this, in the Asia Pacific region, that's going to be a more pressing issue, and probably the solutions that we need to think about. Yeah, again, they'll have to be targeted to the local conditions, and circumstances. But I think that also from a geopolitical level, we will have to, from nations' point of view, we'll have to deal with it in a more humane way, really, than what's happening at the moment, I guess, particularly in this side of the world. But yeah, I guess working right now with enhancing crop resilience and trying to bring back indigenous crops, and trying to restore us, or contain land degradation and erosion, should be the strategies that we should be looking at the moment. But I mean, there's bigger picture effects, like such as the sea level rising, that are really a bit out of I think of our scope to be able to address, and we'll have to be working more on how to support communities to go through these new challenges that are coming in the next few decades, I guess.
Thank you, Gianna, and thank you to everyone participating. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today, but a huge thank you to you, Gianna, who I think it's nearing 4 a.m. in Australia, so probably coming up. It was truly a pleasure to have you with us here today, and your presentation was really informative and inspiring. For all of our listeners, we'll have another webinar coming up on October 28th. You can register now on foodtank.com. And this webinar was also recorded, and if you want to catch it again later, it'll be posted later today on foodtank.com and Food Tank's YouTube channel. So thank you again to everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Good night.